We are back and diving into season 2 of Beyond the Session, the show where your therapist has a turn to hold the talking stick. Something we like to do on this show is ask ChatGPT to give us an intro just to set the tone for our discussion. And today's intro from ChatGPT says, "Enter the safe zone of therapist discussions where honesty is the only currency." Are you ready to get real today?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the only choice I have.
That's right. The computer is telling us what to do now. We're diving right back in. I've got Lindsay here with me. You may have figured this out by now if you've been listening for a while, but we're a husband and wife combo and we own Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. Lindsay's a registered psychotherapist and I'm a registered social worker. We made this show so that clients can have a chance to listen to their therapist before they even book a session, and they can get some free advice. They can learn about how their therapist might approach different subjects and different concerns that they're bringing in. So that's the main reason that we're doing this. And it's also just a fun chance for us to drop off the kids and just come in and talk shop together.
That's right.
That's right. Today, we are hitting on one of the biggest, most popular, most well-known modalities in psychotherapy, which is CBT. And that stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. A lot of clients will request it because they've heard that it really works. They've heard that it's a good tool to use and they think it might help them with their concerns. So today, we're just going to help unpack what it is and how that might go in some sessions. So we have a 2-part series going on. The first part is just kind of explaining the theory behind it and the science. And then the second part will be more about the practice of CBT. What does that actually look like in a session? What kind of exercises will I go through with my therapist when I'm in session? So I guess the first question, Lindsay, is how do you explain CBT to your clients, especially people who have never heard of it before?
I think actually to me, because I'm in this world, it's always surprising when I hear people not know what CBT is, because it really is the standard for what makes a therapist. If you look at the definition of a psychotherapist, it really comes down to talking about how someone who is talking and helping someone through their deep emotional issue, their thought processes and their behaviors. And for me, that's really just the definition of someone who performs CBT. Because what CBT is the interplay between how your body is sensing things or feeling and how that affects how you think and vice versa, and also how that affects your behaviors and vice versa. They are all interlinked and they all kind of have influence on one another. And CBT is about uncovering that and then having tools to regulate or change any of those things.
Okay, so last season, there were a couple of times that we mentioned CBT. Once where we used the good cop, bad cop analogy of different modalities that we use in psychotherapy. And we kind of put the CBT under the bad cop modalities, as in this is kind of a tool where you're trying to fix things. You're fixing your thinking. You're trying to change your thoughts, right? As opposed to some of the good cop modalities where it's more about accepting and being kind to yourself, that type of thing. So as far as the good cop and bad cop analogy, I'm just curious about your take on it since you weren't here when we had that talk, Lindsay, and whether you think this is kind of a fix yourself modality or whether there's some more nuance to that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of it as a good cop, bad cop kind of analogy before. I'm not sure that I would necessarily use the same analogy of looking at it, because I think there are aspects of CBT that are actually very much about accepting or validating what someone's going through, but it's just not keeping you there. I guess that's the point, right? And I think at least most people who are going for therapy is not looking to stay there. They want to be validated, of course, but if they are looking to just stay where they're at and there's no change, then they're probably not going for therapy anyway.
Right. Something that you mentioned was how there's different ways of approaching your mental health. And it's the combination of kind of your mental state, your physical state, your spiritual state. And there's more to us than just the way that we think. I guess my understanding is that CBT is a way to address your thoughts, and then everything kind of trickles down from there. Once you're able to address your negative thought patterns, then out of that will flow some of your physical state and some of your spiritual state. Is that a good way of kind of understanding that?
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't think it's supposed to be, but now that I think about all the tools that are provided by CBT, it is mostly geared towards thought change.
Right. Okay. How then does CBT specifically target negative thought patterns? And why does that work for people?
Okay. So if you think about therapy, a lot of it is, I mean, we call it talk therapy for a reason, right? Because when we have all those thoughts just going through our mind, a lot of the times they're not explicit. But the moment you start talking about it or start writing it down, that's when you start getting awareness of what those core thoughts are, right? So by talking about the negative thought patterns, you can recognize what those patterns are. And then we can talk about, and what's so powerful about that is that in the moment, sometimes now that you've talked about it in session, you can recognize it in the moments that they're coming up, and then you can then alter them.
Okay, so can we tease that out a little bit more? Let's say I'm feeling very overwhelmed because I had a run-in with an old friend. We just seemed to have an awkward kind of talk together, and now it's really bothering me. So I'm just feeling overwhelmed and stressed. So then how would you kind of take a CBT approach with that?
Yeah, okay, so maybe I'll backtrack a little bit and come back to this example. There's this idea in CBT of thin thoughts versus thick thoughts. Thin thoughts basically is they are the thoughts that are not, you don't have actually a lot of evidence for it, but it seems like the truth to you,
Hmm.
right? So when we talk about thick thoughts, what we mean is that we're adding more nuance to it. We're trying to add more flexibility to the pattern of thinking, because normally anything that causes any kind of emotional response, especially strong ones, when you get to the core of it, they come down to some really thin thoughts. They're usually thoughts that are probably true, at least to an extent, but not nuanced.
Okay, so then a thin thought would be a thought that I don't have a lot of evidence for, maybe, right? Like, for example, I've gotten a text from someone before and I kind of go, whoa, like, why are they mad at me? But then I think, sometimes we get to work through this together, right? And you're going, okay, but where's the evidence that they're mad at you, right? Or
Mm.
like, is that even in their character? Or do you think that that's not the way they intended to say it? It just was worded poorly.
Yeah.
Texts are just like such a an easy way to misinterpret information, right?
For sure. It's just, sorry, this just made me think of something because I recently got a bad comment about me, and I can't even fathom how they got that from any interactions I've had, right? So that's the thing about thin thoughts, right? So back to your example earlier of like that conversation with your friend and you're feeling distressed, right? Usually your beliefs are around your view of yourself or someone else or this world, right? So it's one of those things. So in this case, it could be any of those. It could be I am not interesting enough. That's why they are acting the way they are acting, or it could be, they don't like me for some reason. So those are thin thoughts because we don't know the whole truth. We don't know the nuances of it, but because it's become in that moment a core belief, it triggered an emotion in me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think the thing with old relationships too is a lot of times you already have a set pattern of behaviors. And then if you haven't seen someone for a long time, then you don't necessarily know who they are anymore or how they feel about you or what they're thinking or what they intended. And then a lot of times you go back to the way things used to be or how you perceive that they always were towards you. And so that can kind of cause some of those thin thoughts and overthinking. And there may be evidence that was a long time ago, but then it may not be true today, right? But then I guess my question with CBT though, with clients, like, are you always just trying to help them look on the bright side and like correct their thoughts? Or what really is the intention of using CBT tools with them?
Yeah, so it's not, and I'll tell people that in sessions, right? I would say the point of this is not to just have rosy colored lens. In fact, what we're looking for is more realistic thinking, more realistic and more flexible thinking. So that's probably the better word I would like to use is flexibility, right? So classic CBT is worksheets and homework, and they would take a particular thin thought, right? One of those thoughts that are core beliefs that causes a lot of anxiety or distress. And then I would write down all of the evidences for it first. And that's where the validation comes in. It's like there's a good reason why I feel this way or think this way. It's because I have a history of this or evidence of this. But then we would also talk about the evidence of the opposite and see if there are aspects of it that are not true. And only when I get those together can I start formulating more realistic thinking. And I think it's kind of like giving yourself mantras in some way, right? It's like if I can find realistic thinking that I believe in, then I can now more easily replace my thin thoughts with something that's more robust because I've already thought through it.
What I'm starting to hear is that it's not just about correcting a thought, so much as rounding that thought out so that you can look at it from different angles. So even if that thought was correct, right? I had a weird interaction with someone who I used to know a long time ago, and it left me feeling distressed or anxious, or even if there is truth to the thoughts that I'm thinking about whatever was happening there, I can still round out my thought process a little bit. So I can say, oh, maybe they were having a bad day, or maybe I was having a bad day, or maybe I don't know, like I wasn't well prepared to deal in the scenario. Like you can kind of stretch out your thinking a little bit so that it doesn't necessarily need to be so distressing, right? When you're replaying it over and over and over. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think that you captured it pretty well. You're rounding it out. Now, of course, that's just one aspect of CBT, right? So we can always look into other parts of it too. CBT typically is a modularized program, right?
Mm.
So there's actually workbooks and worksheets to go along with it. Yeah, and that's the stuff that for some people they would actually really love that, right? Some people want this modularized, like I know I'm going to go through all the evidence-based steps of changing this particular feeling, and some people hate it, and that's why for me it takes a bit more of a flexible approach. A good therapist ought to have many tools, CBT being one of them, and they can use aspects of it in the session based on the reality of the moment.
Right. Like you kind of mentioned this. Some people appreciate when their therapist is more like, oh, what do you think about that? And sort of a softer approach where they're teasing out thoughts, where your client's able to kind of process their thoughts and have a safe space and, share concerns that they're not able to talk about with anyone else. Whereas some people are like, I have this problem. I want to fix it. And I want to know that there's something that's going to work. And I want to see the list and the steps so that I can know how my progress is going right now.
Yeah.
And I think you've had a blend of both clients, right?
Yeah, it's just this is the like philosophy, right? It's like the difference between, or the battle between structure versus free form, right?
Mm.
And some people are just more drawn to one or the other. So as a good therapist, you need to have the flexibility, again, I'm using that word, to be either of those things based on the experience of the client.
Yeah. Personally, I'm not the workbook rule follower type of client or person. And I think there's words in CBT that, in and of themselves, make me cringe, even though I'm not sure I fully understand what they mean. So maybe we can go through some of those cringe words.
Sure.
And you can help me understand it a little bit better. So the first one is, how would you describe rational concerns versus cognitive distortions?
Oh. It's just funny because I'm listening to these words. I'm like, I never use these words. I like this saying that, anything that's good can become bad when it's too much of that thing, right? So a rational concern is a good thing. You teach your child to be scared of the road because they can get hurt if they walk onto the road. So that's a rational concern, right?
Mm.
A cognitive distortion is, I'm just, thinking back to my own children, of our children, of course. I see a lawnmower far away and now I'm scared that it's going to kill me, right? So I guess that's part of that, even the tool that we mentioned earlier about evidence for, evidence against, is to discern whether my concern is rational or whether it is a distortion.
Right. So then the exercise that you might use in the lawnmower case, this is a true scenario, by the way. We've gone through this with one of our children, but
When they were younger.
when they were much younger, but going through and saying, okay, well, do you see who's driving the lawnmower? And oh, yeah, that's a nice lady. And do you think that she's trying to run over little children in the park? No, of course not. Do you think she's watching where she's going? Like, we're kind of working through just a curiosity
Yeah.
about what's
Yeah.
happening. Like, is it loud? Could it be a frightening sound? Yes, absolutely. But do we need to avoid the park when the lawnmower is going? Maybe not, right? Like, let's try and
I,
build a little more confidence here.
right. I'm loving this because it actually just reminded me that we are always using CBT, right? It's in everyday life. CBT is just putting the words to it or system or structure to it. In CBT, you're talking about your body, you're talking about your thoughts, and you're talking about your behavior, right? So when you're talking with a child, you're doing the same things. Hey, just make sure that you're breathing. Make sure that you're relaxed. You're really tensed right now. And then you're talking about, some of those concerns you were just talking about, right? Is that rational? Is it is it a distortion? Now we don't use those words, of course. And then finally, we're talking about behavior, right? Like, okay, well, let's keep walking down this pathway, and and then think about, am I safe right now? So we're reframing really all three of those things, which is what CBT's aim is.
Well, and even the lawnmower example, there's what's that ladder tool called in CBT?
Well, some people call it fear ladder or stress ladder. I like stress better.
Stress inoculation.
Stress inoculation is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So then in the lawnmower case, it might be, hey, well, okay, this is the first time we're seeing this extreme fear popping up, right? My kid is climbing me because they see a lawnmower in the park. Maybe we won't directly walk through the park, but we might walk on the sidewalk beside it. And then we stop and go, hey, how did that go? Was I safe? Did the nice lady driving the lawnmower try and run me over? No, she didn't. And it's just kind of assessing and reaffirming. And then once there's a comfort level with that, saying, okay, well, maybe today we can spend 5 minutes at the park. And if you're still feeling uncomfortable, then absolutely we can, pack it up and go. And just kind of building that confidence to be in scenarios that are feeling uncomfortable. And it's then telling your brain that, hey, I'm actually safe right now, or I'm actually okay, or that thing that seems so scary to me doesn't necessarily have to be something that stops me from doing things I want to do. So that kind of leads into the second cringy word, which is cognitive restructuring. Maybe this is why we're in therapy and not in, psychology, psychiatry side of things, is we don't really like the $1,000,000 words. So cognitive restructuring. And another way of saying that is rewiring our neuropathways. So there is science behind this, right? It's not just us observing our children and going, oh, that worked, I'm going to try it in sessions.
Hmm.
So can you describe a bit of the science behind that?
You know what? I find that neuropathways, the word, is actually better understood than it used to be. So when I use that word, I don't really get a negative kind of feedback from people. People mostly nod and like, oh, of course. I think the best way to imagine it as an analogy is a river carving the land. And if the river is redirected a certain direction over time, it will carve deeper rivets so that it becomes more entrenched, right? So that's kind of what's going on in the brain with all the processes that we are born with, and they're always restructuring over time. So what we're doing with therapy is basically giving opportunities for some of that restructuring or for some of that pathway to change. So the way that works, I mean, this is all just covered in neuroscience, right? You can see that the brain's physical matter actually changes based on your thought patterns and behaviors.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right. And so for example, let's say addiction, right? Addiction is like a pathway in the brain. You can see that the part of your brain that says no to that addiction literally gets smaller or less used. But once someone stops that behavior and they find more adaptive or better behaviors to cover it, those pathways become stronger and stronger until it becomes easier or possible for a person to break out of that addiction.
Okay, that kind of answered my question. I was going to ask if CBT is appropriate for addiction.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's one, again, I mean, CBT is one of the tools, right? Like, it's not, people just like it because it is studied so much that there's evidence behind it. It just means that statistically we have pretty good idea that it does work for most people. But statistics is a matter of averages, which means that for some people it works really well, and for some people not at all. So yeah, that's why there is no one size fit all approach.
Right. Yeah. I guess I just thought of that because when it comes to cognitive restructuring or rewiring neuropathways, I'm thinking about the way addiction can start, right? Oh my goodness. Here's a story from our kitchen. So I ran into a crazy deal on table cream last week. And then I was like, oh, how can I use all of this? We don't drink that much coffee in a day. So then I made all this dulce de leche, right? And the minute I tasted it, I was like, uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Neuropathway
Neuropathway
triggered.
triggered, right? I'm like, oh no, this is delicious. So then suddenly I'm like, I tell myself I'm going to have, 2 spoonfuls of it with my apple slices. But then the next thing you know, I've had 5 or 6. So then the addictive nature of sugary things, right? So then I can see where over time I can tell myself, like my brain might start to say, okay, well, actually you can have 4 or 5. Well, actually, it's okay to finish a whole bowl. And it starts to change the way that I'm thinking about the substance, right?
I just had a good thought. I think that our brains are made in a way to give us automatic behavior because it's too hard to make decisions all the time, right?
Mhm.
So, the dulce de leche story is a good one to illustrate that, because if I don't think about it, I would just take another spoonful. And so a lot of what CBT is bringing awareness to our automatic so that we can actually do something about the automatic. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think some of the CBT I'm doing on myself with the dulce de leche is going, hey, I have friends who would enjoy this, so I don't want to eat all of it on my own. Or, hey, like I don't want to get cavities from this. So I'm looking at some of the potential harms. Or I had, 6 spoonfuls and now I'm feeling a little bit hyper, but then I know I tend to crash after I have a sugar high. So I don't really want to feel that way. So then I start to associate it also with things that I don't want, right? That's where finding a balance and going, okay, maybe the 2 spoonfuls or 3 spoonfuls is enough for me. I can enjoy my dulce de leche responsibly and not have to deal with the negative consequences. So some of that is just like reeling myself back in and looking at the different angles of this little scenario that I've concocted for myself.
I think the idea of neural pathways is a double-edged sword, right? It's good news and bad news at the same time, because it means that if I have a particular thought pattern that becomes entrenched, then it is hard to rewire it, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it also means that our brains are always evolving and is always changing, and I have the opportunity to actually change it. So, I had a client recently that it was a big light bulb moment for this individual, that happiness is a choice, right?
Mm.
It's like, I feel so unhappy all the time, but that's because there's an actual pathway with that, and it's been built up over time, over childhood, over and then snowballed over into adulthood. And so now we are discussing, having a new kind of pathway and practicing it. So it will take a little bit of time and effort to carve this new neural pathway, but that's the good news part, is that you can.
Right. And some of the exercises you might go through, which I mean, we'll dig into these more in the second part of the series, but some of the exercises with that might be journaling and doing more gratitude exercises, right? Or looking at negative thoughts that you're having through the day and asking, why am I thinking this? Or where's the evidence for that negative thought? And just being able to like unpack those thoughts a little bit more. So some of it's just time and reflection that needs to happen. And over time, it is possible to rewire the neural pathways, which I find so encouraging. I find that so hopeful because I know, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but there's been times where, I've really struggled with certain thoughts. And the fact that you're able to kind of unpack them and get past those and not be stuck in that for the rest of your life is just great news. Right? No one wants to feel stuck and no one wants to feel like, their life is closing in on them or their relationships are falling apart or they'll never be able to become unstuck from this addiction that they're facing. That's a really hopeful part about cognitive restructuring, rewiring neural pathways, is that people can actually heal and get better. And I just think that the way we're made is so amazing.
Agreed.
Okay, well, the third cringe word that I wanted to go through was behavioral activation, which I don't even know what that means. So maybe you do and you can explain it to me.
Yeah, this is a hard one, I think, because I think the context of behavioral activation is in depression. So depression is a lack of hope. It is a coping method to avoid pain, really. And so to do that, usually it means just not doing much at all. That's why people with deeper depression are looking at the wall or lying in bed and not doing much at all. And so by doing that, back to the neural pathway ideas, they're basically creating and entrenching a pathway that says, don't do, because if I don't do, then I won't feel. Right.
Mhm.
And so behavioral activation is basically, well, change that behavior because it is the only real way to get out of depression. You have to change your thoughts and your behaviors, right? I mean, why this is a cringe word, I think, is because you're telling a depressed person to start doing things.
Right.
Yeah.
Like to me, you tell that to a depressed person and behavioral activation, it means get up off your couch and do something. That's the cure here. And I mean, it's just like counterintuitive in a way, right? So is there a better way of understanding that?
Well, I'm actually sympathetic to it in some ways, right? Because it is true. Like you can't just not do anything and expect to get better. So the problem, and this is a catch-22, really, right? Depending on the person, some clients, that's what I'm saying. Some clients, they're like, I'm ready to change. I have
Yeah.
a commitment to change. I want to get better.
Mhm.
Then yes, behavioral activation makes sense. If there is no motivation, which again, like I said, catch 22, because a huge part of depression is no motivation, but there's no commitment, I guess maybe that's a better word, no decision to
Mhm.
say, yes, I want to get better, then I can tell you to my face is blue to start doing things and you won't do it. And you'll just be mad at me for telling you to do so.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is one of the terms from CBT that makes me feel like it's a kick in the pants modality. Like, get off the couch and start doing something. And I think for myself and just the things I've experienced with people I've supported, sometimes there's more to it, right? I've known many people who have faced depression and it was actually food related, nutrition, right? They're having some kind of an extreme reaction to something they're eating, and then it's completely making their moods crash. And then it's really hard to get out of that, right? So I think just for our listeners, please understand we're just unpacking CBT today, but it's not the only modality that we use with people. And there's often, a bigger, wider understanding to what people are going through. And if people are ready for change and sick of being stuck, then we'll try and go through that with people. We're not just going to apply CBT to them. We've said that before. We don't just believe in the one quick fix for what people are going through.
We say this so many times, probably in this podcast and in our understanding. We're like, yeah, therapeutic alliance, like your relationship with the therapist is the number one thing. Modalities are secondary, right? And the reason why is because, that's why a good therapist is able to gauge your readiness for CBT, right? And or at least have the trust between the two people to ask, hey, there's this thing we can try out. Are you ready for that? Do you want that? Right.
Right.
And to have the wisdom to either bring it up or to use it or not.
Yeah. And then I guess your responsibility as a client is to say, I don't like this, right? Like, you're giving me these worksheets. I'm not into worksheets, or I don't like the behavioral activation. Like, what does that even mean? So sometimes it's just up to the client to say, hey, like, this isn't working for me. Can we try something different?
Yeah. So let me give you another example though of behavioral activation. So we mentioned the stress ladder before, and that can actually be a form of behavioral activation, right?
Okay.
You can say, like, for example, I have people with social anxiety, but they want to heal. They
Yeah.
want to be more confident in social settings. So we might actually set up a list, right? We would say, hey, like, what social behaviors give you a lot of stress, and which ones don't give you that much stress, but it gives you a little bit of stress.
Mm.
And so we would, lay those out as a list, put numbers beside it for how much stress it gives you, and then put it into a ladder from lowest to highest. And then that's where behavioral activation comes in, is when you choose the bottom layers to try out and to practice and use cognitive behavioral therapy methods before you feel comfortable enough to go to the next one.
Yeah. This is something we circle back to often, and we're going to touch on in episode 3 and 4 this season. But I'm curious whether CBT is appropriate for clients with trauma, and if that's something you would just dive into with them, if there's ways that you could use that's not going to be more harmful, or whether it's something you just kind of don't use with trauma clients.
So I guess I got two answers to that. The first answer to that is that CBT is generally can be helpful for any symptoms attached to trauma. So it can still be helpful, but what I would caution against then is to dive right into memories or traumatic events. That's not what CBT is used for,
Right. It's
right?
cognitive behavioral therapy. So then it might be more appropriate if there's major avoidance going on and it's like, hey, I can't even get in my car and drive anymore. So then you might use the latter approach to say, okay, well, are you okay sitting in your car in your driveway? And then, I mean, you'd work through this with clients and ask them questions about what they might be comfortable with, and then they can kind of set their own goals. But just like slowly building up your confidence in, being able to drive around the block one time. Is that something that you could try if that's appropriate in that scenario, right? And that's where a lot of wisdom needs to be applied, and it needs to be used with other modalities, I think, in conjunction to it, that are properly addressing the trauma aspect of things. Anyways, I don't want to get too far into that. That's a little teaser for what we're going to get into in the following episodes. I'm curious too about the softer side of CBT, or whether there is a softer side of using things like self-compassion, reducing self-criticism, incorporating mindfulness even. Is there space for that within CBT methods, or is that just something completely different?
Well, I think that even in making your thoughts more flexible, it's part of building that self compassion,
Mm.
right? because when you have criticism, it is usually thin thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So we're just making that more flexible. I think that we mentioned this whole good cop, bad cop kind of idea, and I can see where that comes from. And at the same time, I don't think that that's what CBT is meant for, right? It's not supposed to be this thing where it's like, oh, your thoughts are bad, better change that, right? it's it's actually it's actually more compassionate than that. It's about like, wow, I can see where this is coming from. I know why I think this way. I need to become more flexible. Used well, CBT is supposed to be gentle.
Yeah. And I guess it's not always used well.
Yeah.
Right? I think there are spaces where, especially on the kind of more medical side of things, where it's kind of, you've got 6 sessions, brief CBT, and it's very like fix, 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 correct that thought and get out. Whereas I think it's up to the therapist to be able to add that soft side, self compassion, reducing self criticism. And as a good therapist, you're filling in those gaps for the client so that they can understand that this is a way of giving yourself kindness, right? I don't want to feel this way anymore. And by doing this hard work, I think it's going to bring me to a place that is more comfortable.
Yeah, I think, we modulized CBT. There's a place for that, right?
Mm,
I think that, big agencies that needs to hit a lot of clients. And of course, there's a need for that because, mental health is so pervasive and not everyone can afford private care, for example.
yeah,
And there is good evidences for even brief CBT if done well. But I think the dangers of that, though, is the quality of the training, maybe, or of the people who are doing it, because there's a temptation there to become really boxed in, I guess, to have none of those soft skills part that are attached to good CBT. That's why it's so important for us in our practice that we're always looking for, even in our interviewing process, when we're choosing or finding associates, we're looking for people that can have good conversation, that can smile, that can give you eye contact, that can actually hear you out, that can be flexible in how they're going to approach you, because you can have really good modalities and have people who use it very terribly
right.
and people who use it very wisely.
Like people that are going to come in and slap down the CBT textbook and say, let's work through this. And like we said, it's more nuanced than. And I mean, we don't want to throw, the 6 session brief CBT under the bus either, because there is value in learning skills. And it's like tools that you're really learning them intensively in those sessions, but then it's something that in theory you could take home with you and continue practicing, especially if you have people around you who can help you think through those and work through it, right? Some people have that and, it could be very valuable to them. I mean, it's not our philosophy here. We're more about the long-term relationship with clients. Just seeing that our thoughts, if we're having a behavior or a thought that has been bothering us for some reason, a lot of times that's not the only thing going on. And so we're willing to kind of work with you through, unpacking the different layers, getting to a spot where it's not just, okay, I dealt with that thought, but like, hey, I feel equipped to deal with future challenges that arise with confidence. And I've now got the tools to be able to work through them. Or I have someone I trust that I can call to work
Yeah.
through it with me.
Yeah. I think that there's something about a relationship that feels safe for you to talk about things, to be seen and heard, and to feel no judgment, but just good intent from the other person, that in itself heals people. And that's why, like all the tools that we have, they're simply tools. It comes back down to the person to person connection, and it's professional connection too, because we are, we care for our clients as people, as human beings, but at the same time, we're removed. So we're not part of your life. And that's why it's safe for you to talk about certain things. And that's the kind of magic recipe for the two sides of this. On one hand, we're a professional. On the other hand, we're really building a relationship here for you to heal from things.
Yeah. So I guess my one last poke at the bear um, is just I'm curious about how CBT can teach people how to develop positive thinking habits without ignoring the real stuff that they're going through and might still be living in.
The whole point of CBT is to not ignore, actually, but to recognize the challenges, but then thinking about more flexibly being able to think around it. So there are different ways to do that. When we talk about thoughts, there's really three in my mind. There are three kind of approaches to our thoughts. One of them is to become just more okay with them, and that's probably more the mindful kind of approach. The second one is to reframe them. And that's really more kind of a CBT kind of approach. The third one is kind of CBT as well, and that's the thought stop, the hardest of the three, right? But even in that, though, there are some methods for that actually do work. So that might sound like a form of thought suppression, but there are some times when it is helpful because there are thoughts that are just not helpful. And so if I can find a way to recognize that and to let it go, then that is actually a form of thought suppression that's positive. But no, in the moment though, when you're seeing and you're going through hard things, yeah, you're not trying to ignore them. You're really just trying to take into account that they are not necessarily the be all end all of things.
Yeah. My brain just went to Mad TV. You know, the skit where the girl walks into the psychologist's office and she has this irrational phobia and she's trying to, get cured.
Just stop it.
Just stop it. That's how you do CBT, my friends.
Just stop.
Just stop it. Anyways, that's not how we do CBT in our office. I think that's a good intro to CBT and understanding a little bit about how it can be nuanced. It's not only a recipe book, right? And I think I'm excited to dive into more of the actual practices and the worksheets and tools that you go through with people just to understand how some of those might be appropriate in different situations. So stick around for episode 2, and that's going to be the part 2 of our CBT series, where we're looking more at the actual practice of it in sessions and what that might look like with your therapist. This is Beyond the Session, brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. And if you have any questions about what you've heard today, feel free to contact us using resetbarrie@gmail.com. And you can also check out our website at resetbarrie.ca. We'll catch you next time.